Hey, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining. I've recently come back from a self-drive photo tour of the Kruger National Park here in South Africa. And what an amazing experience that was. Of course, I took thousands of shots and now I'm in the editing process. Pretty much finished with the culling process, but I'm editing. And today's video, I'm going to talk you through one of my edits of Wild Dog. And you can see some images behind me. It was a classic photo safari experience. You wait and you wait and you wait to see one of the marquee animals, one of those sightings that's going to live with you. And I had waited for 3 days, and then all of a sudden, they're there. Fortunately, I had my camera in Be Ready setup, so I had a pretty decent shutter speed. My lens was wide open. I was on the Sigma 150 to 600 contemporary, so it was at f5, I think it was f5.3. So my camera was ready, and my strategy in those situations is to get some shots done, get a burst of images so that at least you've got something in the can. And then you hope that the animal sticks around for a bit longer so that you can really focus on composition, backgrounds, moving the car backwards and forwards or what have you, and really try and nail that perfect shot. But my strategy is always to get some shots in the can. And the images that you're seeing behind me, albeit they'll be a bit blurred, but the images you see behind me are those 16 shots I think I got in total. And unfortunately, they didn't hang around. 1 minute, the wild dog was there, and the next minute, they were gone. So I'm left with those 16 shots on be ready mode. Now, some of those images are not great. I've cut legs off, I've cut tails off. The composition may not be all of that great because I'm working at real speed, and I might be tweaking some of the settings as I go, but it's 3 or 4 bursts of 3 or 4 shots each, and none of them are perfect. So today we're going to take one of those images and we're going to post-process that image, and hopefully we'll get an end product that is worthy of the experience itself. Let's get started. Right, so let's have a look at this raw file. As you can see, it's not fantastically composed with the legs of the wild dog cut off at the bottom of the frame. The exposure is not too bad. It can take a little bit of higher exposure, which we'll get to in a moment. But I think the first thing, the most important thing, is the crop. I like the body position. I really like the slightly downward gaze of the wild dog off to the left-hand side of the frame. And I'm going to use the blurred body as the space for the dog to look into. What I mean by that is we know that we want the space to be in the direction that the animal is moving or looking. Well, in this case, the animal is in the direction from left to right, but is looking from right to left. And with this blurred background of the body, that allows me to use this space as the space for the animal to look into. And that affects my decision on my crop. I don't think a 6x4 is going to work because I'm going to need to get in pretty tight to not have these limbs as distractions. So I think in this case, it's a 1x1. It's a square ratio. And I think that can be quite impactful. So I'm going to crop in pretty tight, make this a portrait shot, leave a little bit of space above the ear and to the right of the ear, but not much. And then I really do not like these distracting elements here. So I'm going to crop in to try and remove those as much as possible. I can't go all the way in because that's too tight a portrait in my view. But I think just capturing the curve at the back of the body in the frame is a good compromise. As you can see, I've got pretty good focus here on the eye, on the face of the wild dog, which is great. As I mentioned, the settings on the camera are my ready to shoot settings. So hopefully ready for 80 or 90% of scenarios. So I've got a pretty fast shutter speed at 1,250th of a second. I'm pretty wide open on this lens. This is my Sigma 150 to 600 contemporary lens. So 5.3 is wide open. And that's resulting in an ISO of 2,200. The D850 can handle a fairly high ISO, so I'm not overly worried about 2,200. There is a little bit of noise in the shot, which we might clean up in a moment, but it's nothing that's overly distracting. So I've gone for the square 1:1 ratio image, and the next decision I'm making, because of the background primarily, is I'm going for a black and white image. I want a really quite a bold, contrasty black and white portrait here. So let's jump into basic, convert that to black and white, and then we'll start looking at the basic panel. Now my edit is split into two very clear components, the subject and the background. So my global edits are going to be relatively minimal because there's not much I want to affect globally. Let's quickly raise the shadows a little bit. The whites can move quite considerably and the exposure can come up a little. I'm not going to move the blacks at this stage. I'll deal with those separately across the background and the subject. So let's go straight into selecting a mask here. And I'm going to select the subject and see if that does a reasonable job for me. As you can see, it's a reasonable job, struggling a little bit with the fur on the edge of the ear. And this hard-fought nick in the wild dog's ear hasn't been spotted by the Lightroom algorithm. He fought hard for that nick, so we'll recover that. So I'll quickly speed through the process here as I just make adjustments to the selection. Just talk you through it very quickly before I go into fast forward. So I'm going to use add and subtract. I'm adding to the selection on these components that have not been highlighted in red, and I'm subtracting from this area here where the algorithm hasn't identified this element as background. And there's some bits down this side of the image that I need to tidy up as well. I'm going to use the brush tool to do that, but you don't want to watch 3 minutes of me tidying up a mask, so I'll fast forward this section. Okay, so I'm relatively happy with that selection. I'm going to also create a duplicate of that and invert it so that captures the background for me. So click on the 3 dots, duplicate and invert the mask, and now you can see I've got a background. But again, I've got some elements of the selection that are not perfect, so I'll quickly clean those up. Okay, I'm reasonably happy with that. The AI masking capability of Adobe Lightroom is fantastic. It's great, but it's far from perfect. So it's definitely worth spending a little bit of time making sure your mask is what you want it to be. And so I'm fairly happy with where we've got to now. What I want to do for the background is to lighten that up. It's a little bit messy. It's got the capability to be a little bit distracting. There's some dark areas that really do catch the eye. So if I take the overlay off a moment, your eye is drawn to the light area of the image. But for me, that top right area, is definitely dragging my eye. I can't unsee it. So there's some work I need to do on that as well. So multiple ways that I could lighten the background. Obviously, I could just increase the exposure. Now, for me, that looks a little bit harsh and doesn't seems to just have a tipping point. So I'm not overly keen on that. I can increase the whites. I can increase the whites and bring the blacks up to try and address that top area. But for me, because there's some distraction in there as well, I'm going to use the dehaze as an option. And that will lighten the image. It'll also remove some of the distraction. And if I take some of the texture down as well and the clarity, that will add to that effect. So I think that really helps the background. I'll come back to this top right section in a moment, but I also noticed here, this area that I mentioned before that was distracting, obviously that's part of the background. So I'm just going to remove that from the mask so that that area doesn't get lightened and become even more of a draw to the eye to distract your eye. So let's go back into here and find my subtraction brush. Make sure I'm on 100% flow, and I just want to remove that effect from here. It's relatively minimal impact, and I'm going to need to come back and address it in a moment. Okay, so now we're on to the subject itself. I'm going to bring down the highlights a little bit because I do want to raise the whites. Not too much. I'm going to need to bring the shadows up. I'm going to bring the blacks down. I want it to be quite punchy, quite contrasty. That's actually quite nice already. I'm actually quite pleased with that. Just jump into the tone curve, not the global tone curve, just the tone curve for the mask. I'm going to apply a simple S curve just to boost that contrast even more. I'm going to soften those blacks a little. I think that works quite nicely. Okay, so now I need another mask. For this image and almost any portrait type image, the eye is critical. So I'm going to do a bit of work on the eye area. So I'll select a radial gradient and let's jump in close. I'm happy with the selection that I've got here, so I'll remove the overlay so I can see what I'm doing. And what I'm going to do is raise the shadows in this area. Increase the whites. Tiny bit of exposure. And under detail, I'm just going to add a bit of noise reduction to the eye. 39, let's just take it back to 0. Yeah, around that 40 mark, I think is a good balance. I need to darken up the pupil. I don't think just adding blacks is going to work, but let's have a look. And we'll see the before and after. So before the changes, after the changes. Quite a significant difference. To come out and see that, just to make sure it's not overly done. I don't think it is, but I do think that black pupil needs to be accentuated further. Now maybe adding some clarity. No, I'm going to go old school. I'm going to select another mask, just a brush, reduce the size, and just paint over the pupil. And for that area alone, just reduce the blacks. Make sure that the highlights still pop. So I'm really putting contrast into that tiny part of the eye. And you can see the difference there. And at full size, subtle but important. Okay, now I think the blacks here and in the muzzle are just a tiny bit too strong. So I'm going to select I think it's a brush that I'm going to need. I'm not going to be too careful with the selection, and you'll see why in just a moment. Okay, so that's a very rough selection, and I'm just going to intersect that with a luminance range, so selecting a relatively dark area. So it's not removed a huge amount, but so the mask wasn't too bad, strangely enough, despite the speed. But that just takes away any of the really light areas. And then I'm going to raise the shadows just a touch. Bring the blacks down a little. I think that just works. So before, after, pretty subtle, but I think it's an improvement. To go back into the main subject mask, the whites in the body of the wild dog are much brighter than the whites in the head of the wild dog. So I'm going to address that because I don't like that. Two ways that I could do that. I could obviously reduce the brightness in the whites in the body, or I can increase the whites in the head of the wild dog. And I think to get a really punchy image, increasing the contrast in the in focus area of the dog, the face, is really going to give me a much more punchy image. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to use a radial gradient to select the head of the dog. And then I'm going to intersect that mask so that it only selects the areas with the subject. Now we know that the subject selection always missed this part of the ear. So I'll very quickly add those back in with the brush. Now this bit doesn't need to be terribly accurate. And then I need to remove that section of the ear again. Okay. And then all I'm going to do is boost the whites. Now I'm going to remove the effect completely from the body of the subject. That's much better. Probably take it down a little bit more even. That's much better. Okay, I'm still left with this section up here, which is still distracting for me. So I'm going to add a linear gradient, drag that down to here. I'm going to remove the subject. And I'm just going to brighten that up a little. About there works fine. Just before and after. Yeah, let's just take the contrast down a bit. That's better. Final distraction. This little piece of grass or twig or something caught in the dog's fur I want to remove. So I just use the removal tool. Don't use AI generated often at all. If I can avoid it, certainly don't need it here. Okay. Now I am going to apply some denoising to this. So down into the details panel, denoise, turn on. And it's probably too much. Just take that down a bit. In Adobe Lightroom, the latest version, the new denoise feature is really useful. The previous version would create a separate DNG file with the denoise functionality applied to it. With the new version, the latest version, which I think is 14.4, you can check that. I'll pop it up on the screen. But the latest version, the denoise is within the same file, and you have an adjustable slider. So in the previous version, separate file, you set your denoise level to whatever you wanted it to be, and you were stuck with it. That was it. Once you've made the decision stuck. Well, now I can adjust the amount of denoise I want on the fly. As I make a further edit, I can come back and change the denoise with the slider like most of the other settings. So it's a real improvement in the denoise feature of Lightroom. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm just going to jump in away from the eye. Yeah, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. I am going to quickly sharpen it. I'm very happy with that image. So there is the final edit. I'm really pleased with the way that image has turned out. I think it's a really striking, punchy portrait of a fantastic animal. It really shows off the wild dog's beauty, its menace, its majesty. So all that's left is to print it. So I'm pretty pleased with that edit. It's come from a raw file that I wasn't very happy with. It was a grab shot more than anything that was composed or had a lot of time or thought or preparation into it. As I said right at the beginning, I always have my camera on be ready mode. So with settings that I think will work for 80 or 90% of the shots. What that doesn't do is get your composition right. It doesn't stop you cutting off limbs. So I think we've done a good job with not a great initial product. It's certainly an image that will remind me of the morning and remind me of that sighting. And that's what's important, right? At least to me. I've got several videos that are already out from that self-drive through Kruger. Please check those out. There's more coming up. If you want to be reminded of those, then click like and subscribe and all of those good things. More importantly, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop me a note in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and I do my best to respond to as many as I can. I look forward to seeing you soon, and in the meantime, please, take care. Bye-bye.